Have you ever felt older than your age? Not just in school, but in life. Maybe you were the quiet kid in the room, the one who listened more than you spoke. Adults called you mature for your age. It sounded like a compliment, and maybe it was, but it didn't always feel like one. You felt different, separate, like you were watching life happen instead of living it. You might have struggled to relate to kids your own age. Their interests felt loud, their reactions dramatic. Their problems seemed small compared to what was running through your mind. Over time, you started carrying yourself differently, more careful, more aware, a little heavier. Feeling older than your age rarely happens by accident. It usually starts early. As a child, you noticed things others didn't. Subtle tension between adults, shifts in tone, silences that spoke louder than words. You learned to read the room before you even understood what that meant. While other kids played, you were observing, scanning, adjusting. That awareness doesn't just appear. It develops when your environment demands it. Sometimes it happens in homes where emotions were unpredictable, where you never knew which version of someone you'd get that day. So you became careful, intuitive, attuned. And attunement can look like maturity. If you feel older than your age, you've probably always been the responsible one, the dependable one, the person people lean on. Even now, friends come to you for advice. Strangers open up to you quickly. You're the steady one. It doesn't feel dramatic, it just feels normal. But underneath that normal is a pattern. When a child learns that staying calm keeps things steady, they stay calm. When they learn that helping reduces tension, they become helpful. When they realize their emotions add weight to a heavy room, they minimize them. Over time, that becomes identity. You're not just someone who feels older, you're someone who learned to hold more than you should have. You probably never fully let go. Even in relaxed settings, part of you stays alert, watching, measuring, interpreting. You don't overreact. You don't explode. You don't fall apart easily. But that doesn't mean you don't feel deeply. People who feel older than their age often feel everything intensely. They just process it internally. You replay conversations, analyze what someone meant, consider how your words landed, think about situations long after they're over. That's not overthinking, that's pattern tracking. When you grew up needing to understand people fast, your brain adapted. It learned to read subtext, anticipate outcomes, stay one step ahead. That's why you feel older. You're rarely just reacting, you're predicting. You might also feel out of step with milestones. While others jump in impulsively, you hesitate. You weigh consequences. You think long term. You've probably been called serious, maybe even too serious. But seriousness isn't the trait, it's vigilance. Most people assume feeling older means you were naturally mature, gifted with wisdom. But sometimes what looks like maturity is just a child adapting to complexity before they were ready. If you had to mediate adults, you felt older. If you had to comfort a parent, you felt older. If you had to solve your own problems quietly, you felt older. It didn't come from being superior, it came from responsibility.
And responsibility reshapes identity. You might now find it hard to rely fully on others. You trust yourself first. You handle things alone, even when help is available. Not because you don't value connection, because independence once meant safety. There's also a subtle loneliness. You crave depth, real conversations, emotional honesty. Small talk drains you. Surface-level interactions feel exhausting. You're not distant, you just struggle to connect in spaces that don't feel real. When you were younger, that gap felt even wider. You may have sat with peers, feeling like you were constantly translating yourself, slightly out of sync. That internal difference quietly shapes who you are. You start thinking, maybe I'm just different. Different doesn't mean detached. It often means developed early. Here's something else. You might struggle to access your playful side, not because it's gone, but because it never felt safe. Play requires letting go, trusting the moment. If you grew up scanning moods or tone, your nervous system learned that staying alert was safer than relaxing. Even now, part of you stays composed. You don't fully lose control. You don't fully unravel. Others might admire that. They might call you grounded, stable, wise. But they don't see the effort behind it, the internal calibration, adjusting words to keep peace, anticipating disappointment before it happens, preparing quietly just in case. It doesn't feel dramatic, it just feels like you, but it wasn't random. It was a pattern formed in response to something. Feeling older often comes from emotional acceleration. You learned lessons early about people, about tension, about consequences, about words. That creates depth, but it can also create distance. You might feel out of step with peers who grew up freely, who didn't have to interpret emotional undercurrents. That doesn't make your experience heavier or lighter, just different. Here's a subtle truth. People who feel older often struggle to identify their own needs. You think of others first, of the environment first, of keeping things stable. Your feelings come later, sometimes much later. It's not that you don't have needs. You learn to put them aside. Prioritizing yourself once felt risky. Over time, self-suppression becomes automatic. You become the composed one, the wise one, the steady one, and that role is reinforced externally. People rely on you, trust you, lean on you, which quietly confirms the role you stepped into years ago. But roles formed in childhood don't always reflect who you really are. They reflect who you had to be. Once you see that, the feeling of being older than your age makes sense. It wasn't about age, it was about exposure. Exposure to complexity, exposure to unpredictability, exposure to responsibility before readiness. Some people grow up chronologically, others grow up situationally. If you feel older than your age, you grow up situationally. You adapted faster, you processed deeper, you became aware earlier. That awareness shaped your personality, how you enter rooms, how you speak, how you listen, how you hold silence. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Your seriousness wasn't random. Your independence wasn't accidental. Your depth wasn't a flaw. It was protection. It was adaptation. It was your mind creating safety in a world that demanded it. And that awareness alone shifts something. Instead of seeing yourself as too much or too different, you start seeing the pattern underneath. It was never about being older. It was about carrying more. Understanding yourself is the first step. Sometimes the quiet traits you've carried for years tell the deepest story.